What's going on, everybody? This is Afro Think Tank. Today's video is going to be about the African American or African slave rebellions in America. A lot of people don't know that we was sitting there fighting right along with the Haitians against these European savage barbarians the whole time. We ain't never stopped fighting. We've been fighting this whole time. You see, the American educational system doesn't tell you about the times we took up arms and fought to the death to free ourselves, right? You see, it wasn't no white man named Jesus that sacrificed himself for you. It was a black man. It was an African man who sacrificed himself for you. That is who sacrificed their lives for you, bled for you, died for you, right? A black man who practiced his traditional and original spirituality. And it was that African spirituality that gave us the strength to fight against these savage barbarians. Ultimately, we didn't win every battle, but each battle brought us closer to the freedom we ultimately got when we completed our liberation during the Civil War, when we once again fought for our freedom, right? No white man has ever given us freedom. They have never given us anything. We've taken everything that we have ever achieved, we've taken. And I want you to think about that. I want you to think about how the black man and the black woman started out as less than cattle. First, we were knocked off of our pedestal of enlightenment and civility in Africa, snatched, taken to a foreign land, and made less than cattle. And we fought for hundreds of years. Black man, black woman, and our black child has fought for hundreds of years and went through all manner of devilish, demonistic things in order to get to where we are today. We are not our ancestors. Our ancestors were some badass motherfuckers. All right, we need to be more like our ancestors, because it'd take 20 of them would take arms and start a revolution. You get 500 black men with guns together, they ready for war. What are we doing now? What are we doing now? Talking about people's hairlines on the internet, joking around, playing games, talking about what we're gonna do but not doing it. When we're clearly, our ancestors have sacrificed so much in order so we can be put in this position. What are we doing? We're supposed to complete the mission our ancestors started. Complete and total liberation and equality, right? And unfortunately for certain demographics, equality means that other people won't measure up. And look, life is not fair, and that's just the way it's gonna be. But that ain't got nothing to do with us. We need to continue to fight like our ancestors are. We need to be more like our ancestors, who would take arms and fight against insurmountable odds in a foreign land where they have no orientation, no way to get back home. But they would rather fight and die than to be slaves to the system. Anyway, y'all tell me what y'all think in the comment section. It's Afro Think Tank. Learn some, teach some. I'm out.
There were hundreds of slave revolts and thousands of acts of resistance during the period of enslavement in the United States. Hello, everyone. My name is Taharka Ade, an Africologist, scholar of Africa and the African diaspora. And when we talk about slave revolts, many times what we're talking about are organized collective action, planned resistance, often with real political goals. And there were many. Here are a few examples. The Stoner Rebellion took place in 1739 in South Carolina, when a group raided an armory for guns and with drums marched in formation towards Spanish Florida. It was the largest revolt of the colonial era and likely made up of mostly people from the Congo Kingdom. However, the colony reacted with mass killings and harsher laws to restrict black gatherings and black movement. Then in 1800 in Richmond, Virginia, Gabriel Prosser orchestrated a large-scale plan to lead people to freedom. Prosser was a skilled blacksmith, and he used his skills and his ability to move between plantations and the city to build a wide network. His plan was audacious. Hundreds would gather, march into Richmond, seize the armory, and then take Governor and future President James Monroe as hostage to bargain for freedom. But a severe storm delayed the uprising, and a few people betrayed them by leaking word of what was happening. A militia quickly stepped in and suppressed them. Dozens were arrested, and 26 were hanged, including Prosser. Next is the 1811 Louisiana uprising, or the German Coast Uprising, which was one of the largest revolts in U.S. history. Led by Charles Delaun's, people organized along plantations, gathering weapons, burning property, and marched towards New Orleans, growing in numbers as they moved. The response was public terror, which led to public executions of participants by local authorities, because slave societies ruthlessly punished as examples. Such the same with Denmark Vesey's 1822 revolt in Charleston, South Carolina. Haiti's revolt had had a profound impact on Vesey. It was proof that organized slave revolts could overthrow empires. But Vesey's plans were exposed and his uprising crushed. And afterwards, authorities began targeting Black institutions, especially the AME Church, because they knew such spaces were hotbeds for insurrection. And then there's Nat Turner's 1831 rebellion in Southampton, Virginia, which many have tried to frame as religious fanaticism. However, Turner used religious authority as a form of leadership, forming a small court group bound by secrecy, and launched coordinated attacks on slaveholding households, aiming to spark larger uprisings. However, the revolt was later repressed, but the aftermath is the real point. Virginia, and much of the South, responded by restricting Black education, Black preaching, Black movement, and Black assembly, which tells you the state read this as political warfare and not just a crime. And these are just the major ones. There's also the 1712 New York uprising, Pointe Coupée in 1795, Amistad in 1839, and the Creole Revolt in 1841, plus thousands of other acts of resistance that included maroon communities, sabotage, work slowdowns, arson, poisonings, and escape networks. For more on this, I recommend Julius Scott's The Common Wind, Michael Gomez's Exchanging Our Country Marks, John Blassingame's The Slave Community, Sylviane Jouff's Slavery's Exiles, and Jason Young's Rituals of Resistance. And for an incredible digital resource, check out Dr. Ife Williams's blackslaverevolts.org.
The year is 1712, and Black New Yorkers stage one of the largest slave revolts in American history. On the night of April 6th or 7th, depending on the source, 24 Black New Yorkers gathered on Maiden Lane near Broadway, just steps away from the Wall Street slave market that would evolve to today's Wall Street stock market. They start a fire, and when white people come to see the fire or put out the fire, the Black people attack. The Black people being enslaved by white people, let's be clear. 9 white people were killed and 7 were wounded. In the panic, the rebelling Black people attempt to escape to freedom, or at least to safety. But the governor has already called in militias to quell the rebellion, and they're sealing off the island of Manhattan. These Black rebels knew that if they were caught, they would be killed, but they would rather die in a blaze of rebellion than live under the yoke of enslavement. Reports stated that these Black people were being hunted down, and at least 6 conspirators took their own lives rather than being captured and tortured. While only 24 Black people participated in the revolt, over 70 Black people were arrested to be put on trial. 23 were convicted of murder and 2 of attempted murder. The British Empire and the colonies were notorious for creative and gruesome torture and execution methods. I say that as a warning. Some reports say that 20 people were publicly hanged, while others say that 20 people were publicly burnt alive at the stake. Some reports recall that one person had every bone in their body smashed by a crowbar until they died. Nearly all reports confirm that at least one person was broken on a wheel. Some people, when they hear broken on a wheel, assume that that means crushed by a wheel, but crushing was a different gruesome torture method employed by the British and other Europeans, but we're talking about the Brits and the colonies now. Breaking someone on a wheel often included both breaking and braiding someone on a wheel, and was altogether an incredibly horrific torture and execution practice designed for maximum pain and maximum public spectacle. I fear I cannot tell you any more about it or show any images of it because this video will be taken down. But I have included all of my sources that I used to make this video. You can find that at the place where those sorts of things go. While these particular Black folks would not see freedom in their lifetimes, in the telling of it, we share the bravery of people willing to risk everything for freedom, juxtaposed by the sight of this rebellion taking place in New York, the financial center of the fledgling nation that would soon fight the American Revolution, while claiming freedom as its cornerstone. Things would get a lot worse for Black people in New York in 1712 before they got better. But the persistence of Black resistance has shaped American freedom, history, and culture from the very beginning. It proves that a better future is possible and worth fighting for.
The largest slave revolt in American history was brutally erased from our textbooks. In 1811, over 500 enslaved people marched toward New Orleans, led by Charles de Laune, determined to claim their freedom. They organized into military units, armed themselves with farming tools and stolen weapons, and marched 60 miles along the Mississippi River. Moving from plantation to plantation, their army grew larger as more joined the fight for liberation. But the uprising lasted only 3 days. Local militia and U.S. troops crushed the rebellion with shocking brutality. De Laune was captured, mutilated, and burned alive. The heads of killed rebels were placed on pikes along the river road as a warning. While we learn about Nat Turner and other slave rebellions, the 1811 German coast uprising was intentionally buried in history. Officials downplayed it as simple banditry rather than acknowledge the largest organized fight for freedom by enslaved Americans. This hidden chapter shows how far power will go to control the narrative of resistance.
New York City was a major hub for the North American slave trade during the 18th century. The city actually had a large population of enslaved Black people as a result of the trade with the West Indies. And in 1711, New York constructed an official slave market. Most of the notable buildings in the city, including City Hall, were built off of slave labor. Historian Chris Cobb stated that it was a city-run slave market because they wanted to collect tax revenue on every person who was bought and sold there. Many roads in New York City were also built off of slave labor. The population in New York City was between 6,000 and 8,000 people, with about 1,000 of them being enslaved Black people. And so on April 6, 1712, a group of enslaved Black people took up arms against their oppressors and revolted. It is difficult to determine how many enslaved Black people participated, as there are reports saying 100, there are some reports saying 50, and some saying 24. However, what we do know is at least 23 met on April 6, 1712 at midnight, and that included 2 women. What was so unique about slavery in New York State is that because it was such a small area, it was easy for slaves to communicate with each other, even if they were owned by somebody else. And enslaved Blacks also worked closely with free Blacks. So that night on April 6, 1712, armed with guns, hatchets, and swords, men began setting fire to a building in the middle of town. And that home belonged to Peter Van Tilburg and his family on Maiden Lane, which is now northern Manhattan. This fire signaled to other enslaved Blacks that the revolt had begun. Another thing to note is that this rebellion was led by African-born slaves that were using African-based religion to encourage other slaves to revolt and called a war on Christianity. This fire also led white people to leave their homes as well, and when they left, they were met with between 23 and 100 slaves, all armed, all ready to go. So the rebels began firing into the crowd. This obviously caused panic amongst the whites, and some of them went to actually alert the governor at the time, Robert Hunter. Robert Hunter ended up sending a militia to end the revolt, and by that time, 9 white people were stabbed, shot, or beaten to death, and 6 were injured. Several slaves were caught. Of the several that were caught, 6 had actually unalived themselves. 40 were brought to trial, 18 were acquitted, and the rest were left to be executed in some of the most gruesome ways possible. 4 were burned alive, 1 was crushed by a wheel, 1 was kept in chains until he starved to death, a pregnant woman was kept alive until her birth, and then she was executed, and the rest were hanged. What's insane to me is that we've learned about several slave revolts at this point, and you know, the most common and courteous thing to do at this time would probably just to end slavery, you know, because I'm pretty sure the people that are being bought and sold don't want to be bought and sold, which is why this keeps happening. You know, the pattern. But no, they was like, let's just enact some more slave codes, guys. Like, let's just put some more restrictions on them. So during the next 30 years, slaves were unable to gather no more than 3 at a time. A master can punish a slave for absolutely no reason at all, just as long as they didn't maim or kill them. So for example, any slave with a firearm will be whipped 20 times. If you were caught gambling, you will be whipped in public. Even laws were put in place to discourage white people from freeing slaves. Insane. New York State would go on to outlaw slavery in 1799, but it wasn't really outlawed the way y'all thought it was, because businessmen continued to profit off the products of slave trade like sugar and molasses imported from the Caribbean. So I interpreted an outlaw as like, yeah, like on paper we're gonna say that we don't own slaves, but we still doing that shit. We just go do it quietly. You see, you never win when you play dirty, because in 1741 the New York conspiracy happened, and that's when poor whites and enslaved Blacks worked together. And when I tell you, it was.
What if I told you New Orleans once held the largest slave revolt in American history, yet hardly anyone talks about it? In January 1811, just upriver from the city, enslaved men and women rose up against the plantations that bound them, Inspired by whispers of the Haitian Revolution, they armed themselves with cane knives, axes, and sheer determination. Over 2 days, they marched downriver toward New Orleans. Their numbers grew, dozens, then hundreds, burning plantations along the way. Witnesses said drums beat through the night, echoing freedom. But the uprising faced brutal resistance. Local militias and federal troops intercepted them near the city. The rebels fought fiercely, but they were outgunned. Dozens were killed in battle, and many more captured. What followed was pure terror. Heads of executed rebels were placed on pikes along the Mississippi River, stretching for miles, a warning to anyone who dared dream of freedom. Yet their courage sparked whispers across the South. The 1811 German coast uprising proved that even under chains, the will to fight for liberty could not be crushed. What does it say about us that America's largest slave revolt is almost erased from memory?
Let's talk about the first slave revolt in what is now the U.S. In 1526, the Spanish founded San Miguel de Guadalupe in modern-day Georgia. It was the first European colony in what is now the U.S. The indigenous peoples remembered the Spanish as the Spanish raided their coast for slaves years ago, so they were incredibly hostile to the Spanish. The Spanish also brought enslaved Africans to build the colony. Instead, these Africans set fire to the homes of the colonial leaders and ran into the forest, never to be seen again. Some historians believe they escaped to live with the indigenous. This was the first ever documented slave rebellion in what is now the U.S. Because of these troubles, the Spanish left, and during their voyage home, some of them froze to death. Of the 600 Spanish settlers who established the colony, only 150 returned home alive. Imagine how different history would be had that Spanish settlement actually succeeded and flourished.
I bet school never taught y'all about our first rebellion in the Americas ever. It was in the year 1521 on Christmas Day. Muslim West Africans from the Mandinka and Wolof ethnic groups actually came together with the indigenous people in Hispaniola and tried to end slavery and take over the island back again. They did everything they could to get out of slavery, and eventually the governor, actually one of Christopher Columbus' descendants, had to get his militia to put everything down. Like a lot of the other rebellions, they started on Christmas Day because that's when a lot of people are distracted, and this led to some of the first laws restricting our movement and organizing and things like that. And even though they wasn't all the way successful, they influenced a lot of future rebellions, and it just shows that this narrative of us just sitting down and taking everything and taking all these beatings and getting bit by dogs and stuff is not true. We've been fighting back since we first got here.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such an extent that you bleach? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! We most definitely cannot forget about the people of Sudan!
Thanks for watching Afro Think Tank. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Substack and Patreon for more content. Remember, it's Pan-Africanism or nothing.